The Canadians literally broke through the windows to get into the bungalow and to get at the Japanese. And of course, this bungalow had been fought over for about 24 hours and was full of dead and wounded. And the Canadians, using the bayonet and hand-to-hand fighting, captured this bungalow. The problem then was that the Japanese started to counterattack. And the reality was the Canadians had no reinforcements. There's only about 10 or 12 guys who were left because they've all been shot down in the cemetery. And they had to evacuate and get back to the cemetery for their own safety. They held that line until the mid-afternoon when a staff car showed up and 2 British officers got out and announced that Hong Kong had been surrendered. And the Battle of Hong Kong was now over.
D Company lost 84% of its original force of 120 men in Stanley. 26 men were killed and 75 were wounded. That night, we were informed that the governor of Hong Kong had surrendered.
After 18 days of vicious fighting, the island of Hong Kong is completely controlled by the Japanese Imperial Army. With thousands of Indian, local, and British troops, 1,600 Canadians are taken prisoner by the Japanese. 300 Canadians are already dead.
One of my friends I burned was a person by the name of Bill Fallow. Well, I'm sorry everything had to happen the way it did. But everything's for the best, I guess. Maybe he was lucky. It certainly wasn't very pleasant where we were, so I think probably he was luckier than we were.
Over 1,400 Canadians are shipped to Japan, where for the rest of the war, they will be used as slave labor. Many will die there. In their first battle at Hong Kong, 2,000 young Canadian volunteers were swept up in a disastrous defeat.
The Nippon forces complete the occupation of entire Hong Kong, no longer able to resist the British surrender on Christmas Day, December 25, 1941. Banzai! Banzai! Nippon Banzai! The day of triumphant entry into Hong Kong is here. With the fall of Hong Kong, the foremost base of British imperialism, it means the dawn of a new era, and an era of peace and happiness is here to stay for all of us.
This is the Sai Wan Memorial, and it commemorates more than 2,000 men who died in the defense of Hong Kong or died later in captivity and have no known grave. There are 228 Canadians on this monument, and they're named just over here. There are more than 100 men of the Royal Rifles commemorated on this panel. In fact, 3/4 of the men killed in the Battle of Hong Kong have no known grave. And of course, some of the names you can recognize. This is Bill Fallow, who was murdered at St. Stephen's and then put on that mound of bodies and cremated. The Winnipeg Grenadiers panel has 114 names, and near the top you have John Osborne, VC. He was awarded as VC for Jardine's Lookout. This is the grave of Lieutenant Eric Mitchell of the Winnipeg Grenadiers, and he was killed 20th of December 1941. And the personal inscription here says, brother of Lieutenant W.V. Mitchell, killed in the same action. In their death, they were not divided. Him and his brother were captured by the Japanese on Mount Butler, taken back to an area just in behind us here near Saiwan, and both were then executed. This is the grave of Brigadier John Lawson of Ottawa. He had served in the First World War and remained in the Army in the post-war years. He was the commander of the Canadians when they arrived in Hong Kong, and during the battle, he was the commander of West Brigade. He was killed at Wong Ni Chong Gap on December 19th, 1941. He was the highest-ranking Canadian to be killed in action during the Second World War. The Battle of Hong Kong was a disaster, but it was only one of several Allied defeats in what was the darkest hour of the war. For the Canadians captured here, their nightmare had only begun. Of the 2,000 enthusiastic Canadians that sailed into Kowloon Harbor, 1 in 3 would never return home.
Daddy, let me stay out late, for tomorrow is our wedding day. Can't the baby kind of celebrate? Oh, kiss the boys goodbye. Daddy, let me wear the mink. What's the difference what the neighbors think? Let the baby linger on the brink. Oh, kiss the boys goodbye.
I had been told by a First World War soldier, never join the service. Don't go overseas. It's not what you think it is. And of course he was right, but who listens? And of course we didn't. And we suffered the consequences. Yeah.